Hi everybody, it's Sarah Cray and I teach watercolor, and today we are doing our Manger project from our Peace on Earth ebook. I'm really excited about it. This is it.
Oh, wow.
Thank you. We have Michael here, who is my husband. He'll be working the cameras.
Hello.
And we are going to be doing this project in 4 steps. So our very first step is we are going to put in the top half of our background with the value change and start putting in the bokeh. Our second step is we will go ahead and do the bottom half of the background with a value change, and then we're going to check on our bokeh. Our third step is we're going to paint our wood manger with the blanket and the hay. And then our very last step is, again, going back in to do the bokeh, checking any finishing details. That's it. Okay? I will say that out of these 3 card designs, this one is probably the most intermediate one, just because bokeh is really one of those tricky things that it's really easy to get lost in it, and it's very loose, and it takes a lot of time of just looking at your painting and stepping away from it for a second to see what it needs. But I think you guys can do it. We'll do it together and it's going to be great. One suggestion that I do have, though, if you do not feel comfortable doing the bokeh background, and you guys know your level so you can make this decision, is you can still do kind of like a highlighted value change, and instead of doing bokeh, maybe you do almost like little sparkles, or take your bleed proof white and do little dots, so it still feels like it has that feeling of glow and warmth that we're trying to get through that painting of light, without having to do all of that background texture that's a little bit tricky. Okay, so the supplies that I'm using, I have my pans here from my Let's Make Art pan set. I'm going to use all of the colors maybe. It's hard because we're doing a lot of neutrals, and so I'll be mixing a lot of colors, but you'll see here what I'll be mixing together. I also have my bleed proof white in case I need that. And the 3 brushes that I have here are my Let's Make Art 3/4 inch brush, my round 10, and my round 4. I use Holbein soft tape to tape my card down, and depending on the cards that you have or the paper that you're using, your card can either come flat, like a flat piece of paper that you can take down, or this one was already folded. I actually found that for me personally, I like painting on it once it's already folded because it's much easier to see the tape width, so I know that I'm doing like equal amount of tape on each side. That's really the biggest difference. Oh, and with the flat paper, I noticed that it tore a little bit easier into the flat, like non-painted side than when I do this. I don't know why. This is just what I have found, but you do whatever feels comfortable for you. All right, we are going to do our outline, and then we're going to do a note, and then we'll start, okay? Also, we have brought our dog. Her name's Birdie. You might hear her.
Sweet bird.
Sweet bird. Michael, take a picture of her and we'll plop it in the video. She's so good. She's such a great dog. She's not a barker either, so you shouldn't hear her. Okay. Okay, so I have my graphite paper. I'm going to take it dark, shiny side down. And then my outlines, I trimmed out of that paper, so it's just much easier for me to place on my watercolor card. And then I'm going to take a pen, and any mark that I make will show up underneath. Now you'll notice, especially in this project, there are a lot of hash marks. Ooh, I need to go darker. You guys see that? You can't even see that at all. So I need to press harder. So these hash marks that are all over this outline, you do not need to put those in. It's a way that I can show you that there is a shadow there, or a darker value, or a value change. And so you don't need to draw those. Just keep your reference photo handy, because then you can refer to it as you're painting and you can see, oh yeah, I need to make sure that there's a shadow there, or I need to make sure there's, a value shift there, that kind of thing. Also, I always like to say this, outlines are guides. They're just a way for you to have a general understanding of placement, but they are not, this is not a coloring page. So I want you guys to let your painting inform you as you go and as you paint, where if it makes sense to maybe change something, if you forget to put a line in, you can change it. There's no problem with that, and you're not doing it wrong. You also don't have to put in these like hay texture lines. Again, I put things in like that just as a reminder to do some kind of detail line or mark making in that area, but it's not necessary. Okay. And then I'm just going to keep that handy just so I can refer to the shadows and the highlights as I'm painting. Okay, let's do our oath. If you can raise your right hand and repeat after me. I promise to be kind to myself.
I promise to be kind to myself.
I promise not to compare my work.
I promise not to compare my work.
And I promise to have fun.
And I promise to have fun.
Okay, so we are going to start with our very first step, which is putting in kind of our value shift change on the top half of this card. Now, the biggest thing that I have learned and what my hope was when creating these projects for this ebook was that this is really a celebration of warmth and light. And so you'll notice that in all three of these projects, light has a huge effect on the overall composition. So we have a highlighted section kind of coming in here like a spotlight effect. So I'm going to take my round 10. I'm going to get it wet. I'm going to pull some yellow onto my little mixing palette to see that color. I'm going to add water to it. And then I really wanted to give it like warmth. So I added a little bit of red in there. So I'm going to grab some red. And that makes it kind of like, if you do too much, it's going to turn it like a peachy color. And I don't want that. So I'm going to mix more yellow in. And then I want to mix like a brown. You can see that I already have some brown on my palette, but I'll show you how to mix that. So to mix brown, you usually just want to mix like complementary colors. So I'm going to do some red, and I'm going to do some green. And then to darken it, I'm going to do some navy. And now I have this really rich brown, and I'm going to add a little bit of red and yellow to it. Like so. So now I have my values and my different colors ready to go to put onto my painting. So I'm going to grab a little bit of yellow with some water because we want this to be a light value. Now this is where pan paints can sometimes get a little bit tricky, and maybe it's just for me of how I mix, but they get muddy really easy. So when you notice that it's getting muddy and you're not getting the pure color that you're looking for, all you have to do is dab, like get it wet on the top and dab, and now you have your clean color again. So I'm going to grab some yellow with some water because I want this to be a light value, and I'm just going to start putting that in. And I'm going to avoid the blanket because I want to keep that white. I'm going to spread that light value yellow across. And then I'm going to start pulling from this like really warm orange yellow that I have. And I'm going to just start painting around that kind of spotlight. Let's do a little bit richer yellow right here at this transition. And it's really up to you, the saturation level. The more layers of just color that you do, the brighter the saturation or deeper the saturation will be. And that is really where it comes down to like artistic preference. What do you want this to feel like? What do you want this to look like? But the biggest thing is that we're essentially just leaving this a light value here. And then I'm gonna do a darker, I'm gonna start pulling from my brown to get this corner. And then maybe a little bit down here. And again, we're avoiding the blanket, the manger. I feel like it needs to be a little bit richer in color. And then now is where we're going to start thinking about putting in our bokeh. So I'm going to, you can keep using your 10 or your 4, whatever's easier. And I'm going to start kind of lifting color out. You can use a paper towel. I feel like I actually want to do one more yellow wash. Because even though we're trying to get like a spotlight feel, I want the transition to still be smooth, so it's not like this hard line where the highlight is and where the shadows are. I want it to be a little bit softer, which means that I need to kind of move that transition out a little bit. But again, this is your painting, so if you're like, I actually really want the spotlight to be very strong, you can do that. This is completely up to you and your card that you're going to be sending to your loved ones. So I'm going to keep lifting out the circles. I'm just taking like a damp brush, wetting the circle area, and then using my paper towel to pick it up. I have found that when you do overlapping bokeh, it looks a little bit more realistic. And because we're all working in this like wet on wet area, you're gonna get some like fuzzy edges. Like you'll see this isn't totally smooth. You can go back and smooth those out. What we don't want though is like a hard line or ring around the bokeh circles. And remember, we're going to be like coming back to this because watercolor changes as it dries. You think that, oh, I put a highlight there and then you come back to it and it's gone. Or it dries darker than you anticipated. Any of those things can be it. So this is just our initial run through. So don't, after this first step, the top is not done. You're not walking away from it like, oh, that's completely finished. You're actually going to give your eyes a break from that area, because then when you come back to it with fresh eyes, it's much easier for you to make decisions about some changes. So I feel good about that bokeh. What I am going to do though is work a little bit on my color transition. I want this to be a little bit darker here in the corner. So I'm doing another layer of brown. I also feel like I get some gorgeous warmth here on the yellow on this side, but I'm kind of missing it on this side. So I'm just going to take yellow, and you can like work around the bokeh that you already put in, or just paint on top of it and lift out again. I do a little bit of both sometimes. And then I want that transition to be smoother. So I'm going to kind of lift at that line to soften that line. What I found is also really helpful and actually works great with greeting cards that we're making here is if you do a few at the same time, one, it goes by faster because you're batch painting these steps. And two, when you work on more than one painting, you have a tendency the tendency to overwork is gone because you are focused on so many different things. So if you have a problem with overworking in general, a great thing is to actually have 2 paintings going simultaneously that you're moving back and forth from, because then you're kind of shifting, making adjustments, shifting, making adjustments, and you're not just like going in and in and in on the same painting. Okay, that was step 1. This already is feeling pretty good. And Birdie's at my feet, sleeping, so cute. So now we're going to start our second step where we are going to put in the value change on the bottom half of our card. Now you can see that I have a shadow going in here, and then it moves to like a lighter value transition. And the point of that is I want to communicate that this handmade crib is in a larger space in a larger room. So that's why we have this value shift here to say this room continues to go back, but we don't see that because there's no light reaching over there. If you wanted, you can do this all one value, but what that's going to do is it's actually going to flatten the space. So just by doing a value shift around it, we're creating a 3-dimensional space that this crib can be in. So I want to make sure that my darkest values are on either side. It transitions to a lighter value, and then I'm going to put in a shadow to kind of ground it, okay? And already you can see that my top half is changing as it dries. I actually think the color that I got there is lovely. I love that. Okay, so I'm gonna start with, I have a dark brown. I'm gonna mix more of a dark brown. I'm gonna do red. I'm gonna do green. I'm gonna do navy, more navy, more navy. There we go. See how dark that brown is? That's what we're looking for. Okay. And I'm going to start it kind of right here. I'm not going to start it right here because I want the dark to transition and meet up to the top half and not have it feel like a hard line. So I'm going to start this dark here, go across, put this here. And then I'm going to add like a lighter brown to it. And I'm not just adding water. I'm picking up other color so then the hues transition as well. If I were to just add water to this, let me rinse my brush to show you, and only pulled color away, see how gray that brown is compared to what we have going on up here? We want to make sure that we're matching our hues as well as our values. So this one feels like more of a natural transition because of how warm it is. So I got to do the same thing on this side. And then I just kind of work the area back and forth. There we go. And then that same kind of warmer, lighter brown, I'm going to work out here. And I'm still using my round 10. Okay. And then at this point, I'm going to start transitioning to kind of like my tan cream color. Now, one thing that I want to call attention to is there is some space behind here, right here that I'm painting right now, that the shadow of the room would be back there as well. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, we don't want to just create an outline around the crib because it's independent from the background. So those shadows would still be happening behind the crib. So we got to be aware of what we can see through that crib area and make sure that it matches with the rest of the background. Here we have hay filled in, so that's not really going to be affected. Okay, now let's get some yellow. Now for me, I wanted the yellow to feel a little bit more like the ground floor instead of like this gorgeous, like heavenly light. So I kind of tried to neutralize the yellow a little bit. So you can do that by grabbing a little bit of this gray and mixing that with the yellow. And now it's more of like a cream color instead of an orange. And then I'm just going to meet up for those value changes. Now I am kind of painting vertically here, but at this point we would probably want to start doing a horizontal brush stroke because ground is horizontal, right? The floor. And I'm just kind of working around the pieces of wood. It doesn't have to be like the perfect color or a value at this point. It's really just me filling it in, and then I'm going to go in and finesse it. So I kind of filled in all the area, and I'm going to add a little bit more warmth just because I'm a sucker for like dropping in yellow and oranges. I feel like it just adds a richness. But I'm not going to do like this. I stayed more orange. This one I'm going to stay more like yellows, tans, browns. So that feels pretty good, but now I'm looking at my shadows that I put in, and I feel like this value here is too flat. I want to do a darker shadow right in the middle of that, because even in the shadows, unless it's like full black, there's changes, right? Because that room keeps on going. So kind of right in the middle is where I want that darkness to be its most dark. And then it transitions out. Now, sometimes you have to do this in a few layers, and sometimes you have to do it when it's a little bit more dry. So you guys, I need you at this point to kind of look at your painting and say, I feel good about those values, or you know what, that needs to transition a bit smoother, but it's still a bit too wet for it to make a difference, so I'll just go back into it. Take some time to have like a critical eye in your painting so you can tell what it needs. Okay. So I'm kind of just making my brush strokes go horizontal. I'm not necessarily putting on any colors right here. I'm just looking at making this feel like this is a floor that keeps going. So I'm just kind of, and I know it sounds silly, but something as simple as the direction of a brush stroke gives the viewer a ton of information of what's going on. Okay, that feels pretty good. I'm gonna let that dry for a second. And before, I want to let it dry before I go in and put in my shadows underneath here to ground it, because if I put those in now, they'll kind of just bleed out and not really stay sharp like I want them to. And I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna look at my bokeh. So I have a little bit of a brown bleeding right there. That's not a big deal. And this is a great example of how your painting changes when it dries. Colors stay super saturated when they're wet in watercolor, and then as they dry, they tend to desaturate just a little bit. It's not the end of the world, but that's why it's important for you to revisit areas, because if you're like, oh, that's not really reading as warm as I wanted it to, then you just need to do another layer. So that's what I'm saying in my mind right now. I need another layer of yellow to kind of like give it that rich warmth that I want. I'm going to grab some of that red again. And at this point, I can meet up with the bottom half. Kind of make sure that smooths out. And then I'm going to try and work around some of my circles, my bokeh circles, because that's a really light value that I want to keep. The nice thing is we do have bleed proof white at our fingertips. So if you need to like just go back in and put in a lighter value because you just painted over it too much, you can. And that's why I like having bleed proof white around. I can fix stuff, you know. Bokeh is also really interesting because there are some times where I'm like, oh yeah, this is looking great. And then I'm like, I'll do another layer. And then I'm like, what did I do? I messed it all up. But you just keep going until you feel good about it. And when you start to get frustrated and angry, that's when you know you need to just walk away for a minute. Just give it a minute. I'm going to see if I can lift out some of that brown that bled. I was able to do a little bit, but not a ton. So I'll probably go in with bleed proof white kind of at the end. And already just by having some circles that I left alone and I painted around and then some that I just did is wash over, I'm already starting to get a little bit of that out of focus dimension that we're looking for when it comes to bokeh. I'm going to switch to my 4 and try and clean up some of these circles so they're not as like jaggedy. Is that a word?
It is now.
It is now. We don't want jaggedy circles. Jagged. Jagged is the word that I'm looking for. And then maybe I'll create a new one here. Tear off a little piece of my clean paper towel. And maybe one here. Now again, if you know yourself and if you're just like, I would rather not do bokeh on this, think back to our nativity project that we did. That's part of this ebook, and you can just do like a similar spotlight thing and it will still have a very beautiful lit effect that I like. I feel like I need a bigger one here. I'm also changing up the size of my bokeh circles. You'll notice that some are smaller, some are bigger. Okay. And even though I love how light this one is, I actually think that it's too light. So I'm going to just do wash over some of it.
There's huge debate in the photographic community about how to say bokeh.
Oh, am I saying it wrong?
No, I mean, I don't think there's a right or wrong. I don't know. I say it how you say it, but
okay.
It's a fiery debate, just so all you know.
Great. The amount of times that I say things wrong, it's really impressive, I think.
It leads to a lot of education. I learned the difference between a macaroon and a macaron.
Oh my gosh,
because
yes.
of the macaroon tutorial.
Okay, I feel good about that. I'm gonna go back to the bottom half. You can see as it dried, the colors desaturated a bit, my values shifted a bit, and it's not a big deal. All that means is it's just like, okay, I wanna do a warmer yellow wash on the top. I'm gonna do a little bit over here. I'm saturating it with color. It's kind of more of like this light yellow wash across the whole thing to give it that warmth. I felt like my values kind of shifted a bit too, so I'm just going to do another layer of that kind of shadow. have that transition into my top half a little bit nicer. And then don't forget this little guy back here. So you basically just want to look to the side of it on either side and be like, okay, where should the value be? And this is going to be different on everybody's
Truck.
big truck. This is going to be different on everybody's because your shadow, it might be a little bit higher, it might be a little bit lower. So you just kind of want to look to either side and just be like, does this shadow line match up? Okay, that feels pretty good. And you are going to get some bleeds and some hard edges here, but that is the beauty of watercolor. Do not let that stop you or let you get frustrated. Like here, I have a lot of texture lines going on, but I feel like it's an opportunity to add visual interest to your painting. And sometimes trying to make something too smooth and too perfect doesn't give it that feel that you want it to. Like this is not a silky smooth ground. This is a dirt floor. There is hay on this floor. There is a bunch of stuff on this floor. So if you get some weird lines, it's not wrong. You can just be like, yeah, it's weird. It's a dirt. It's, you know what I mean? Like this is not granite that we're painting, you know? So I'm going to switch to my 4 and I'm going to grab that same kind of dark brown that I use for the shadows on either side. I'm going to add a little bit of yellow to it to kind of lighten it up. I'm going to put in my shadow. So you can kind of follow here. You can see on my outline, I kind of did little hash marks of where the shadow is going. It doesn't have to be exact. We're basically just trying to ground this. Saying like, yes, this object is on the floor. And maybe it needs to be a little bit darker. That feels pretty red. Okay. I'm going to give that a second to dry before I do anything else. And now let's move on to step 3. We're going to do the wooded part of our, I feel bad calling it a crib. I just don't know if there's
Cradle.
Cradle. Okay, our wood cradle. Thank you.
I think the song though, it's away in a manger, no crib for his. I think it is a crib in the song.
But no, it said no crib for his bed.
Yeah, you were saying crib.
Lord Jesus laid down his sweet head.
Yeah, it's okay to call it a crib then.
Okay.
Cradle is from Rockabye Baby. When the wind blows a cradle will. Cradle does seem more fitting, but I think the song does say crib.
Yeah, I think you're right.
You're not wrong. Pick one.
Okay. Okay, so I really love painting wood. And the reason why I love painting wood is, first of all, there's like so many different types of wood that the colors that you get, they're not going to be wrong because there is going to be a wood that is that color. I've seen some crazy colors on trees and all of those things. So don't stress out about that. The second thing is that the grain and the texture in wood is also different depending on the piece of wood that you have, which I think is beautiful. So what I like to do is I like to choose a brown that I like, and I painted that, and then I'll do some rough texture on top of it, or kind of just like allow the paint and the brush and the movement to do the work for you. Okay. Now what's tricky about this one, I will say, is that the background of this painting is mostly brown, yellow, orange, which is usually the color of wood. So what I try and do is I just try to mix a brown that is a little bit different color than what's around it so it doesn't blend. We don't want it to feel flat. We want it to feel like this is sticking out and it's separate from its background and its surroundings. So I try and switch up the value, the hue, just something to make it different so it's easier for the viewer to see that this is standing apart from the background that we just painted. So I'm going to flip to the other side of this. I have a bunch of blues on here already, and I'm just going to start making brown from there. So I'm going to add some yellow, which is creating this like super desaturated green. The opposite of green is red. So there's a brown. Let's add, and I like to just like pull colors on different sides, so then I can be like, you have so many options of brown to choose from. And if you guys don't already know, brown is essentially dark orange. So if you don't know how to mix brown, mix orange, which is yellow and red, and then add black, add the opposite of orange, which is blue. That will take it down to brown.
Take it down to Brown Town.
Take it down to brown. Okay. So I'm gonna just grab the brown in the middle of those 3 browns that I mixed. I'm gonna use my 4, and I'm just gonna like, see how I'm using the full side of my brush and I'm already getting some textures on here? And then this is where you can say, you know what? Let's add some yellow in there. Or let's add some darker brown in there. Like again, we're just trying to make this stand out from its surroundings. Now I have a little piece that I'm gonna work around here. And you can see on my outline that I gave each piece of wood like an edge, because wood is 3-dimensional too, right? It's not just completely flat like paper. So we want to account for that, and that will just give it a little bit more of that kind of like small details like that, like painting the dimension of wood, even with just a highlight or a shadow, really adds to our painting without us having to do a lot of work. At this point though, I'm kind of just like shaping it. Okay, that feels like it's standing out of my background. Again, it will change more as my painting dries, but then I'll go back in and take a look. I'm gonna work on the one behind it. So I'm just gonna use that same brown. And I'm working around this little, the thickness edge. I'm gonna leave that highlighted for a bit. And using the side of my brush, just allowing the dry brush texture to do a lot of work for me. And then I want to make sure that the wood that's coming out from behind, that there is a shadow there. That's how we're going to communicate one is in front of the other. The one on top is going to be a lighter value. The one behind it is going to be a slightly darker value. Now you can see here, I want to point out that my wood and my shadow are a very similar color right now and a very similar value. They're getting lost and they're kind of flattening out. I'm just aware of that. I'll go in and fix that later. I'm gonna add just a little bit of warmth on here. And then we're gonna do this guy. Again, it's not a lot of detail. It's not a lot of painstaking brush strokes. It's just kind of filling it in and then reacting to what's happening. Okay. Now in preparation of me adjusting the shadow, I'm going to take just a damp brush and I'm actually going to lift the shadow out here. And then kind of just like smooth it out. And then when that dries, I'll go back into it and make adjustments. Sometimes you just need to like lift some color out. We don't talk about it a lot, but lifting paint out of watercolor is sometimes just as important as putting the paint down. I used to see it as like, oh, I messed up. So like I felt bad doing it because I'm like, this is evidence that I made a mistake. But now I kind of view it more as it's just like mark making, except the opposite. It's just as important to it, and it's not making a mistake or trying to fix a mistake. It's more using the medium how you're supposed to. There's no negative connotations with it. So I'm going to leave that out for a second. I'm going to let that dry.
And who's watching anyways? The paint police?
I know. The paint police is like, I'm sorry. You lifted that out? Doesn't count.
Paint jail.
You're not an artist.
Paint jail now. Life sentence.
It's so funny because that's true. Like, who's even watching anyway? Who even knows?
Absolutely.
No one. No one's going to know.
You're your own worst critic.
Well, you really, you know what? We are. We're our own worst critic. But that's why we're here, to be like, you guys, you're fine. You're doing great stuff. Okay. So I'm just kind of like shaping my wood a little bit more. I really love the texture that I got here. See right here? Like that was just from doing the rough brush with a few textures. I think that turned out really nice. Okay. And you can see here, you may need this or you may not. If you look at my reference here, there's kind of like an opaque, I took some bleed proof white and kind of did some brush marks for the highlights on here, but I might not need to do that. So I just kind of want to show you both. Like it's going to give it kind of like a more opaque feeling when you add the bleed proof white, but it's an option to use it. One, if you like that look, or two, if you didn't put a highlight in there. So this one might look different just from the sheer fact if I choose to use bleed proof white or not. And I don't think that there is only one way and one is right. I think it just depends on what it is that you're looking for or what it is you think this painting needs. And then I'm going to go ahead and paint this kind of across the little piece across here. And do these as well. So I'm going to start by just kind of putting them in that way, and then I'm going to do horizontal brush strokes. Leaving a little space gap between where those pieces of wood meet. And the nice thing too is, I mean, I'm assuming we know the story of Christ's birth, where what's this all about? Where these pieces of wood don't need to be perfect. You know what I mean? Like there's wonky pieces. It's handmade, you know, and a humble beginning. And so if your piece of wood has like a thing in it, that could be true, you know? Don't stress out too much. Okay, that feels good. So now what I'm going to do is let's do our hay. Again, it's tricky because we're working in yellows and browns here. And what's hay? Yellow. So it's just like, all right, we're doing more yellow stuff. But what I did with this one to give it a different feel from everything that I'm doing is I leaned a little bit more into the yellow. I also have some brown that I'm going to pull on from the shadow. So I'm going to start by just going around the bottom of the blanket here. Then I'm just going to use water to kind of move that color out. And because we know that hay can be like that nice bright yellow, I can drop in little, like just straight yellow in here. And make sure it kind of continues on down. Yeah. And then I'm going to mix a little bit of a darker value underneath because the blanket itself would be casting a shadow on the hay. So we need to say, hey, this three-dimensional thing, blanket, is on top of this three-dimensional thing, hay. So we need to have shadows. And then because we know that hay is a bunch of little pieces put together like hair, like leaves, like grass, there needs to be value shifts, like uneven value shifts all across, right? It's not a smooth, flat surface. It is kind of like crazy. So I'm going to take in this like medium value and just start doing kind of brush strokes, dropping it in here and there throughout this light yellow hay area that I put. And that's because I'm trying to create an inconsistent value among that hay to show. This is an inconsistent texture. This is not smooth. This is a bunch of little pieces. And don't forget the hay over here on the right-hand side, which is what I just did. So we got to put that over there. Okay. That's feeling good. Okay, I'm going to leave that be for a second. And then now I'm going to kind of step back and look at this as a whole and just be like, how are these elements relating to each other? Do they make sense? Is there anything that's kind of throwing my eye? I am missing, I feel like, a little bit of pure light yellow through the middle. So using my 10, I'm going to work around some of the bokeh that's already there. Or you don't have to. I mean, you can paint over top of it depending on how light you want these values to be. And this is the thing about bokeh, is every layer that you do around the bokeh circles is going to adjust the values. So sometimes I'll be going, I'll be like, oh, I really like how light this is, but I keep adding layer after layer and I avoid some of the circles. And then by the end, the circles look almost white compared to everything else. So you just have to make sure that that your values are continuing to relate to each other in your painting. So when you add layer after layer after layer, sometimes that's good, right? Because you're just like, I want those to be super like white. I want that to be the highlight. But sometimes it can create an inconsistency in your painting to where that white circle bokeh becomes the focus and it becomes too distracting that it doesn't relate to everything else that's happening. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And sometimes you can do bokeh circles just in a color too. I like that one.
In the photographic community, again, as you would guess, there's tons of reviews on different lenses. Lenses are what usually produce different types of bokeh.
Okay.
And in general, you know, more is better, but there is a point at which people say that it becomes distracting. Mm-hmm. And that just reminded me of what you were saying. It's distracting bokeh.
Yes. And I think that that's why bokeh is so tricky, is because we're trying to create depth and dimension through an out of focus background, which is the point of bokeh. But you want it to feel like it's the background. But when we spend so much time and attention on something and we have strong contrast, it automatically will move it up to the front of our viewing field, which then can be difficult to say, oh, that's the background. You know what I'm saying? And I think that there's a delicate balance between doing bokeh effectively where it still reads as out of focus background or light and adds to the overall three-dimensionality of the painting without overtaking the composition and becoming the foreground. So that's why I try and say, like, this is a little bit tricky. This is harder. Not saying you guys can't do it, but that's why it's like a thin line that you got to try and navigate. Okay, that feels pretty good. I'm going to add one more layer of shadow underneath the blanket. And then I feel like this needs some shadow underneath here too, right? To say like the hay is kind of behind the wood. And then we'll do some highlighted hay pieces to show that there's more going on there. Okay. And I really like how kind of red my wood is in my example. So whenever you're looking at an example and you're looking at your painting with watercolor, you could do like a glaze, which is just a thin layer wash of a color over top another color, which will give it whatever it is that you're looking for. So I just did a thin layer of red on top of my wood, which gave it kind of a little bit more of a richness that I felt was missing. So basically, I'm just kind of going through my, what word did we settle on?
Cradle.
Cradle.
Cribdle.
There we go. And just kind of finessing it. Adding some shadows, adding some glazes of color if I want to slightly adjust the brown. And the other tricky thing is I like to work in sections, obviously. And there are times where you kind of like leave an area white, like right here, right? That's the background. That's not part of the wood. And I didn't paint it, but I can't just leave it white. So I got to go back in there and kind of like fill it in and then smooth it out. And I still have to redo my shadow. I haven't forgot about that. Don't worry. I'm putting just clean water on some of these areas because I'm going to lift some of this color out. And then smooth it. There we go. That feels better. Okay. Could do with some warmth up here in this corner. Okay, that feels good. And so now I'm kind of on, actually let's do our blanket and then we're kind of on that very last step of just kind of tightening everything up. We've essentially like laid down our colors, laid down our values, filled in all the areas. We're gonna do our blanket and then we take that last step to be like, okay, how do these things interact with each other? So I'm gonna take my round 4, I'm gonna mix a gray, or you can just pull the gray from your palette. Let's see what that looks like. That's a pretty good like creamy gray. And you can follow kind of like the little marks that I have on the outline. But this is a white like linen fabric that I'm going for here. So I like to put down like where I think a wrinkle would be in the fabric or a layer using the gray. And then I just take water and blend out, leaving the top part highlighted to show that like that light is hitting that top part and creating a highlight on it. And if you want to darken that gray a little bit, if you add a tiny bit of navy, that will create a little bit of a darker color. Don't go too crazy with the navy though, because we don't want it to read blue. Okay. That feels good. I'm going to go in the hay and add just strong hints of yellow. And I'm actually now going to start utilizing my bleed proof white. So I'm going to take some bleed proof white, mix it with some yellow. It's going to give it kind of like a cream, but a really light value cream. And this is where we're going to do some of our hay textures. Just thin lines kind of poking out. It can overlap on the blanket. It can overlap on the wood. Can overlap into the background. Don't go too crazy though with the little textures coming out. We don't want it to feel like a hairy blanket, you know? Okay, I'm gonna give that a second. Make sure you rinse your brush really good to get all that bleed proof white off. And then I need to go into my wood cradle and make sure that I've kind of filled in what I needed to. I'm kind of choosing to do like an orange color for this, just to bring in some warmth. Feels better. And you just kind of go throughout. And remember, you always have bleed proof white to utilize if you painted over a highlight. Like I'm going to actually use it on this piece of wood over here, this edge. There. See how that just kind of gives it a little bit of three-dimensionality? Maybe right here. And along that side. Now I did kind of really work this area a lot, so you can see it's getting a little bit muddy. So if you want to like go in and sharpen things up, you can. And I feel like I need a little bit of a darker shadow in the hay. So I'm going to mix an even darker, almost black. And to do that, if you're like, I'm just getting brown, mix all of the colors together that you have on your palette and add more of the blue and the navy, and that will give it stronger, cooler undertones, more like a black instead of warm undertones like a brown. Variation in value is key when doing these kind of areas of lots of little pieces together. That feels better. And then for my bokeh, I actually feel really good about it. I am going to take some white though, and I'm going to put just white right here. And where there is an area where two circles overlap, just kind of outlining where that one keeps on going can add to that kind of effect of like these transparent lights overlapping. And I feel like this is so strong. Does that feel so strong to you? So I'm going to take see what happens when I do like overlap all those areas. And I think what I might do is just kind of soften this one a little bit. Not a lot to where it's erased, but again, we're pushing the values back a little bit so it's not the overtaking everything. Even this bleed proof white one that I put in there is maybe a little bit too strong. And if that's the case, you can just add a little bit of a color to it to tone it back down. And then I'm a sucker for like little white dots. Little highlights. Now, we didn't really use our 3/4 inch brush, but I have it out because it's a great way to blend an area without affecting the values. Because when you take a damp or wet brush and try and blend something, it will either create a new bloom because you're introducing water to an already wet surface, or it will lighten the values, like lift the color out. I've noticed that if I take a dry brush and just work, if the area is still damp, it works better. But if you just work the area back and forth using a damp brush, it kind of like smooths it out without totally affecting the values. And I feel like the values got a little bit too light here. Maybe here. Feels better. And I'm going to take my dry brush, try and smooth it. And I just want to call attention to, I'm getting a harder line right here. So I can try and blend that out, or something that you can do is put a bokeh circle there, which will kind of disrupt that line. And so it won't totally erase it, but it won't create such a strong line in your composition. I hide not smooth transitions that way all of the time. I'm like, ooh, that wasn't as smooth as I wanted. Oh, bokeh circle. And now it just doesn't feel like as strong as it did. Okay, I feel like the blanket needs one more layer of this kind of hint of wrinkles. Remember to blend out though. And then I'm going to put in my shadow on my ground. Again, we're really just trying to make it ground the cradle, but having it kind of like a different value from your wood. I'm just kind of sharpening this. Well, I think that looks pretty darn good. And for me, it's always helpful. Hopefully when you're doing this, you're doing another one simultaneously, or at least one other one, maybe more. I always, at this point, where I feel like, okay, that feels really good, I can walk away from it. Come back to it a little bit later with fresh eyes, because at this point, we've been looking at this painting for a long time. Our head and heart have been in this painting for a long time, that it's kind of tricky to see really what's happening. So sometimes just giving your eyes a rest and then coming back with fresh eyes is just what you need to like see it for what is there, and then you can make any adjustments you need. I want to do a little bit darker value here on this wood. And then move that brush stroke. There we go. I think we're good as I keep messing with Okay, last thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna lift a little bit of this color right where the light is meeting that blanket. So I'm just taking clean water, dabbing it on the area where I wanna lift up. You wanna make sure you have a clean paper towel. Lift. There we go. There's that light feeling that I'm looking for. This might be too yellow. Okay, I'm calling it good. We did it. Good job, you guys. This one was a little bit tricky because we really had to go in and out so much and kind of let things dry and come back to it, all that fun stuff. But I hope that you're able to paint this, and I hope that you're able to kind of feel that sense of warmth and peace, and kind of like quiet, like silent sacredness that I think that this night was. And try and keep this taped down for like a day so then it dries flat, and then you can remove the tape. And I wanted to show you the first rendition of this project that I did. I added a little bit of like a gold halo around here. So I wanted to just show you that option that you can add that if you want. You can also see I added like a red blanket, but I liked the inherent, but anyways, you can add little embellishments if you want with a gold pen or a silver pen, whatever you're looking for. You can also do a little bit of a detailed border around because we taped off our edge. We have a nice, beautiful, clean edge that you can do line work, dot work, even little lettering if you're comfortable, and really finish that off. So thank you so much for painting with me, and that's it. Good job, you guys. Bye.